What's going on, y'all? Welcome to another edition of the Starchildjr Stuffs and Thangs podcast, where we talk about all types of stuffs and things. How y'all doing this week, man? Y'all doing good? Y'all staying COVID free out there, man? Because the Rona is back. Just when we thought it was safe. Oh, shit, I'm sorry about that. Just when we thought it was safe to go back outside, the COVID is ravaging us again, man. So y'all make sure y'all keep on washing your hands and wear your mask, please. Don't get in this political debate about the mask, bro. Let me tell you something about the mask. The mask is not for you. The mask is for me and everybody else around you. That's what it's for. So you a selfish son of a bitch if you feel like you ain't got to wear no damn mask right now, man, because you're putting other people at risk. What if you got it and you don't know it and you out there talking it all in everybody's face, huh? What if you doing that? That would be fucked up, wouldn't it? So put your mask on, man. Wash your hands, keep your sanitizer together, y'all, because the Rona is real and it ain't going nowhere. Let me send some shout outs. Let me see who's in the chat today. We got the lovely Linda Wu. Hey, Linda. I got Jump. Hey, what's good, bro? I got John Dixon. How you doing there, sir? Sonia Murphy joining me every week. How you doing? I got Ken Funk on there. Family, what's good, brother? And Ron Belton just joined me. And y'all are chatting amongst each other again. So let me butt on out of it. Y'all got it. You know what I'm saying? Thank y'all for joining me. Kenny D, what's good, my brother? Indeed. All right. So let me start off like this. You know what it is. For those of you that are on YouTube watching me right now, you could also watch me right here at thefunkstar.com. Some of y'all might be watching me at thefunkstar.com already. If you are watching me at thefunkstar.com already, click the subscribe. Make sure you subscribe so that I can have your your email. I want your email so I can harass you with newsletters. So make sure you subscribe. That's how you keep informed on the things that are going on in this camp. You know what I'm saying? So go subscribe to thefunkstar.com. Check out some of the merch. No, Sonia Murphy, no new merch just yet, but I'm working on it. As a matter of fact, you might be good to go by next week. I'm not going to promise you nothing, but we working on it. Merch is coming, y'all. If you're watching this at the website, please feel free to donate. Your donations are welcome and appreciated. I appreciate everyone who donated last week. And for those of you that are already watching me here on thefunkstar.com, you know that you can also go and watch this at my YouTube page. And you make sure you go subscribe there too if you are watching this at the website, because you want to just be informed and every time that I go live, and you'll have two places that you'll be able to be informed, and you'll be able to keep up with everything that's going on. You won't be able to miss no news if you just subscribe. So go subscribe, y'all. Yes, indeed. Let's see other things that I can talk about before I get before I get on the ball today. So I don't know if any of you guys checked out the interview of Dennis Chambers last week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I got a lot of good feedback that I saw on that one. A lot of y'all thought it was really funny. That story he told about Felipe, it really cracked a lot of y'all up, as it did me. That was some Looney Tunes shit right there, wasn't it? But it was cool, man. So I hope y'all enjoyed that. And on the subject of interviews, that's the news that I wanted to drop for you guys. So I've been trying to get my interview chops up and everything, you know what I'm saying? And I'm stepping up my game, as you saw when you interview people like Dennis Chambers. You know what I'm saying? That means I'm stepping up in the world, so I'm proud of myself. But next week, my friends, my viewers, and those who aren't viewing, y'all make sure y'all let them know, because they probably not going to want to miss this one. Next week, I'm going to have live on my show, dun, 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 the one and only Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. That's right. He's going to join me live on the Starchildjr Stuffs and Things podcast next week. And we're going to kick it about a few things. He's probably going to want to talk about, for those of y'all that don't know, my very first session ever in life, paid session ever, was on a Red Hot Chili Peppers record. The song is called Brother's Cup. So if you never heard that one before, go and check that one out. I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere, and you'll hear a little young lad on that record. That young lad was me. That was my first paid session. So yeah, it was a Chili Peppers record. So we're gonna have Flea on here live next week, and he's probably gonna want to talk about that, amongst other things. So y'all make sure y'all tune in, as well as who else we got that I'm be interviewing this week. I think I'm gonna be interviewing Doug Wimbish at some point this month, from the band Living Color. Doug Wimbish also from the Sugar Hill Gang, and Doug Wimbish from Doug Wimbish fame, because Doug Wimbish is just badass. If y'all don't know nothing about him, y'all better go to check out and learn about Doug Wimbish, because Doug Wimbish is deep in the streets. And both those guys too happen to feature on my last album, Regurgitated Youth. If y'all haven't checked that out already, now you got an excuse to check it out. Go check that out, man, and go check out Doug Wimbish's features and Flea's feature on my record. But both of them will be on this show. Oh, and I got one more interview too, an extra special one that, man, I almost don't want to jinx this one, but she said she was going to do it. We're going to also have Sheila E. on here, bruh, on the Starchildjr Stuffs and Things podcast. So y'all make sure y'all subscribe and y'all stay in tune, man, because I told you I'm getting my interview chops up, man. I'm stepping up into the big leagues, man. As evidence with the interview that I did last week with Dennis Chambers, that I see a lot of y'all enjoyed. So y'all don't want to miss the Starchildjr Stuffs and Things podcast, man. Y'all make sure y'all tune in and tell your friends, because I want some more viewers, man. I want some more people to view me. I love y'all. I don't get me wrong. Y'all know I love y'all, even though y'all come on my chat and just talk to each other. But it's all good. You know what I'm saying? Because I like creating platforms that brings the people together. You dig what I'm saying? So y'all go on and y'all kick it over there, man. You know, thank y'all for joining me. Nick Gonzalez, what's up there, my brother? How are you? All right. So with that said, let's get into the show. So tonight's show, I don't know if y'all remember a few weeks ago, maybe about a month and a half ago. I think it was actually my second show. I did a little series on my dad, Garry Shider, and I did the early years, right? So this week I decided that I was going to take that into the part 2 of this series, the Garry Shider series. And this week we're going to do, as a matter of fact, I think last time I left off around the time that he was joining P-Funk, and we might have talked about some of the records that he did with the U.S., and the Funkadelic records that he did with the U.S. Well, this is while George was in the midst of what they call it, was in the midst of poaching him from the group, was in the midst of poaching him away from U.S., so we'll pick up from right there, right? So that's what we're doing. Part 2 of the Garry Shider series right here, man. Another reason I wanted to do this was because it was Father's Day just this past Sunday. And some of y'all might have known I lost my father on 10 years ago on the 16th of June. You see what I'm saying? So this was kind of a sentimental Father's Day for me, man. I miss my pops terribly, as always, and you know what I mean? I figured, I everything I do is to honor him, so don't get me wrong, but this week I figured would be a good week to do the part 2 of the Garry Shider series. So let's get into it, the P-Funk years. So now, if I'm not mistaken, we might have talked about his introduction to Funkadelic. If not, we're going to pick up right there. His very first record as a Parliament-Funkadelic. Well, we'll start as a Funkadelic because there was no Parliament when I don't think when he joined the band. At the time he was joining the band, the Parliament's name was in litigation, and George had made a transition to featuring the backup band as the fronts and pushing the singers to as background singers is what he did, and called it Funkadelic. And this consisted of Billy Nelson on bass, Eddie Hazel on guitar, Tiki Nelson on drums, and Tyle Ross, I believe, on guitar at some point. These might not, and Bernie Worrell on keyboards. It might have been a guy named Mickey Atkins, I think, played keyboards before Bernie, if I'm not mistaken, who just passed away. And I think there were a couple of more musicians too whose names escape me. I will have to have Danny Bedrosian on this show. We'll talk about that with him, or maybe I'll get George on this show and we discuss it with him. That would be cool, wouldn't it? Well, anyways, so the band at this time was the band that recorded on the first couple of records. The main band was Billy Nelson, Eddie Hazel, Tiki Fullwood, and Tyle Ross. The Parliaments as the background singers, Bernie Worrell on keyboards, right? So somewhere in between that time, between around 71 or so into 72, I believe, they started to have a little conflicts with the money or something like that. I don't know. If y'all know Billy Nelson, man, Billy, he don't take no shit. So, and he's easily agitated. So who knows? But so I thought, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Billy and Eddie might have went to go, and maybe Tiki might have went to go do some work with Motown, and they played on the Temptations record, Shaky Ground. You familiar with that record? That's Billy and I think Eddie from Funkadelic on that record. So they left to go do that in a dispute, and George, being the savvy band leader that he is and always knowing musicians, he's always got people on deck. So he just so happened to have a young Garry Shider on deck. Yeah, young Garry Shider on deck along with Cordell Mawson. At some point, Bootsy Collins was brought into the band, and they were the new Funkadelic. They were the Funkadelic replacement, right? So at this time, this is around 71, 72. So my dad's first credited record was Maggot Brain. And the first record that he actually wrote was on that album. It was called Hit It and Quit It. And he was credited as G. Shala. I think we covered that in part 1. So that's what we're picking up right here. Young G. Shala, as he was known at this time, because I guess that's what happens to the newbie in the band. In a band this big, people get your name wrong. So that was his first miscredit, was G. Shala on Hit It and Quit It. That was his first actual credit on a Funkadelic record. But now, you know what? Quick side note before I go on. You see this picture that I used? I'm going to give a quick shout out to Young Jock, man, because Young Jock tried to pull that off in American Soul. Did y'all watch American Soul? Young Jock tried. That's Young Jock, the rapper right there, and I think he's on reality TV shows now, so he's probably from reality TV show fame now. That's Young Jock right there, dressed up as Garry Shider, man. So shout out to you, Jock. You did it. And that episode was comical as hell. And before y'all ask me, no, that's not how it happened, but it was funny as hell. I must admit, I laughed my ass off. All right, but back to the real Diaper Man. All right, so now Gary's first credit was Maggot Brain, but now the first album that he actually did a lot of extensive work on as a serious member of the band was this record right here, America Eats Us Young. If you guys have ever listened to this record, just if you just look at the title, you see how far ahead of this time this album was. But this album was around the end of the Vietnam era and the protest and the civil rights, and it's coming out the end of a pretty tense time in the United States of America where people were protesting a whole number of things, kind of like right now. Well, this record right here, America Eats Us Young. This was my dad's the first record that he did extensive work on as a member of the band. He did a lot of writing on this album, and he did a lot of guitar playing on this record as well. Not maybe not as much vocal work as we all grew accustomed to him doing at the time, but he did do an awful lot of writing and guitar playing on this record. So for those of you who didn't know, y'all might be ready to mistake a lot of this playing on here for Eddie or whatever, but that's probably Dad or Ron Bukowski that did a lot of the work. Someone that I left out who was also brought into the band as a replacement Funkadelic the first time was Ron Bukowski. So this album featured songs such as Biological Speculation, Yeah, Kenny D, You Hit the Nail on the Head, If You Don't Like the Effects, Don't Produce the Cause. What else was on this record? Loose Booty was on this record. I Call My Baby Pussycat was on this record. What else was on this record? I think Joyful Process might have been on this record too, if I'm not mistaken. No, I think that was on Maggot Brain. But there was some good records on this one. Miss Lucifer's Love. This album had some really cool original cuts on it. No hits on this record, but definitely some dope songs on here. And this was the first album that Dad did some extensive writing on, right? So from there, that was 72. Not as much, maybe not quite, I'm not sure, maybe not, I'm sure they probably did a lot of touring then, but they weren't doing the big touring that they were known for just yet. So this time they were doing a lot of just touring, probably Chitlin circuit touring and in the studio. And this was Dad's real time getting his feet wet with the record, with the band working on this record, America Eats Us Young. That was in 72. The next record after that one was this one here, Cosmic Slop. Now this record here, this was the album where Dad finally got to do a little bit of vocal work. And this album right here is famous for the title cut, Cosmic Slop, which featured a 20-year-old Garry Shider on the lead vocals at the time. Now, I remember hearing this song on the record for the first time as a little kid. And for some reason, I used to think that this was George singing on the record, because when I would go to shows as a little kid, I noticed that Dad would sing a lot of George's parts on stage. So I just naturally kind of assumed as a kid that was how it went, was that that George sang the leads on the record and Dad took them over on stage. So for the longest time, I always assumed that this was George. Plus, I knew George had that falsetto like that. But it wasn't until I was maybe almost a teenager that I actually found out that this was Dad's singing the lead vocal on the actual record. And this song became possibly one of the first staples in the live show. A song that became so popular and such a staple that they just ended up doing it all the time. Like, they've performed this song for years, probably ever since this song was out, Cosmic Slop. So again, this was the record, the 73's Cosmic Slop, where Dad got to feature his vocals finally. Cosmic Slop, and then you have Let's Make It Last, also on this record. You have This Old Heart Can't Stand the Strain on that record. You have No Compute on this record. What else? You have Trash It Go Go on this record. This was kind of a short underground record, but Cosmic Slop on this record, though I'm not sure what the actual charting was for this song. This song actually became one of the biggest staples in the P-Funk catalog right here. So the vocally, this was the time where I remember my dad telling me. He said, "Yeah, I was doing my best." He said I was doing my Curtis Mayfield back then. Uh, so this is a 19 or 20-year-old Garry Shider who probably hadn't found quite his own voice just yet or what he wanted to do just yet, but he was doing a damn good Curtis Mayfield on here. And then you had a few songs on here where you get kind of the vintage Garry Shider stuff starting to creep its head vocally. The vintage Garry Shider vocal signatures started to creep out in some of these songs too, where something like, yeah, you can't miss what you can measure. I see you, Kenny D. Uh, yeah, this broken heart. March to the Witch's Castle, where him and Bukowski did a lot of guitar work on that one. Um, yeah, so this is where he kind of started to really get his feet wet vocally. Um, so around this time, this is where he was kind of starting to, come into his own a little bit, right, with Cosmic Slop. Um, and it was, the Funkadelic stuff is where he was really introduced into the band, right? So this is about 73. I don't even think they had even started recording any more Parliament records just yet. So it was just all Funkadelic, and it was kind of clear by these next two records, Let's Take It to, Standing on the Verge of Getting It On, and Let's Take It to the Stage, where you actually started to hear a whole lot more of Garry Shider featured as the vocalist. You have Standing on the Verge, where you have songs like I'll Stay, where you hear him vocally doing his thing, and then even though this is kind of more of a guitar driven record with songs like Red Hot Mama and what else is on here? You got Red Hot Mama. Standing on the Verge was kind of a guitar record that the background singers. What else do we have on Standing on the Verge? Oh, you got Alice in My Fantasies on this record, and you got Good Thoughts, Bad Thoughts on this record. A song that I believe is actually both Garry Shider and Eddie Hazel doing a guitar thing on Good Thoughts, Bad Thoughts. Another good record. And then you have Let's Take It to the Stage, which is where Garry got a chance to do a lot of work on this one vocally. You get to Let's Take It to the Stage, and now you have Garry featured a lot vocally, where he's doing songs like Better by the Pound. You hear Baby, I Owe You Something Good. You hear This Song Is Familiar. You hear him all over Stuffs and Thangs. How about that one? You hear him all over, and George all over Good to Your Ear Hole. It's pretty safe to say that the Let's Take It to the Stage album was pretty much a Garry Shider feature. And this actually ended up being a very good record. But you still had no charts, no chart hits just yet. What you had at this point was you had a lot of good Funkadelic records, and by now you have Garry Shider, who's kind of, he's kind of stepping into his own as a guitarist and as a vocalist, and he's kind of being the feature. But now, what also happens around this time, you're talking about 74 for Standing on the Verge and 75 for Let's Take It to the Stage. George actually wins the name to the Parliament name back, the Parliaments, and he cuts the S off of it, and now we have Parliament. So now George has this Parliament entity back, and he gets it a record deal at Casablanca Records. And now Funkadelic is on West Brown, which is an indie. Casablanca is a major label. So at this time, Parliament has to put out some records. And they got to put out hits because they're on a major. They can't mess around. As well as the other deals that George has out there for like Parlette and got, whoever else he's signing, man. The Horns, the Horny Horns, they all were getting deals back then. But once you get to the major players, now you got to have hits. So that's what's going on. And at this point in 74, 75, Funkadelic has some dope songs out, man. But they don't have any hits. So my father, who is someone who has always been a team player, who has always preached, I'm no better than my surroundings. He's never been an iron team guy. He's the kind of guy who can see what's going on and realize that maybe a change needs to be made. Yeah. So, according to my dad, not sure exactly how true this is, but I remember my dad telling me, he said that it was actually him who suggested to George that maybe they should go to Plainfield and go pick up his dad called him his cousin. Said that's his cousin. Should go get my cousin Glenn Goins. Yeah, so it was Dad who says he suggested to George that maybe you should go get Glenn, man. He's dope vocally, man, and he's got his thing with his brothers or whatever, and he probably will be a good fit. You know what I'm saying? So around 75, 74, 75, that's when he entered Glenn Goins into the equation. So at this time, though Garry Shider is a dope ass vocalist, man, and Garry Shider is one of the greatest vocalists that has ever lived. If you really break it down, too bad his body of work is not extensive enough. But if it was, I'm pretty sure the case would be made. But when you got a guy like Glenn Goins was a voice sent from heaven. I'm sure a lot of you guys agree. A lot of you fans who have heard him and watched him bring down the mothership, there's no denying that this voice right here, Glenn Goins, was heaven sent. And again, they needed to change. They needed to make some hits, man. So when they really got into recording the Parliament stuff, I think they had done getting Up for the Downstroke in '74 already. And Glenn was not on that record. The first record that Glenn was actually on, from what I hear, was Bigfootin'. That's what I read, which was on Chocolate City Parliament record. But the point is, once Glenn comes around, Glenn pretty much becomes the featured vocalist at that point. And at that point, my father kind of he transitioned to just a guitarist, and though he had his feature, Cosmic Slop again was a staple in the show. At this time, Dad kind of had to just play some guitar, which was not a bad thing, because around this time, 75, they also start recording the mothership on Parliament, and before you know it, they a little bit of investment, and they have this mothership to take on stage, and before you know it, they're playing shows in front of thousands of people. You know what I mean? And George this is probably the time that George probably put one of the best conglomerates of P-Funk together, the first best conglomerates of P-Funk together, that featured Glenn Goins, Garry Shider, and Mike Hampton as the first guitarist. Cordell Boogie Mawson on bass, Jerome Braley now on drums, Bernie Worrell on keyboards, and the James Brown horns, Fred Wesley and Maceo Parker. Even though it didn't happen like they said in American Soul, they were in the band, as well as the Brecker brothers and I think Rick Gardner. These are now the horns. This was a super band. And so Garry, being one of the guitarists and featured vocalist, had a chance to kind of get his feet wet on in front of a large audience, but not have to have the pressure of carrying the entire thing, which George was the lead anyway. And in '75 into '76, George was a hell of a showman, and he had no problem carrying the show. And with it, essentially, Glenn was the featured lead singer, would bring the ship down, and what you had was a magical funk opera. 75, 76, the Mothership Connection shows, and that's what you had. So at this time, Garry has stepped back just to be a guitarist, and that's what it was. And you had a dope band, the rest is kind of history from there. They started landing the ship, and they became this super entity. Well, in the midst of that, they had to keep recording. But before that tour ended, Glenn Goins, who was a super dope musician and the kind of guy who is supposed to have his own band. Before the tour ended, he went to go sign a deal and go start his own band. So he had to leave Parliament-Funkadelic as abruptly as he got there, in the middle of the Mothership tour, when he was the guy who was bringing the ship down. So wow, that's a heck of a conundrum to leave someone in, right? So I guess it was this time that George now needed Garry to step his game up a little bit. Garry needed to be more than just the guitarist and semi-featured background / vocalist. The ship needed to be brought down by a Starchild. So at this time, going into 77 and following the release of the Funkadelic versus Placebo Syndrome album, which featured Flashlight, which became Parliament's first chart topper. Now you got the pressure of having a chart topper, and you have a #1 selling tour with this mothership coming down, and you got no Starchild to bring it down. So now George needs Garry to step his game up. And again, Garry Shider has always been a man who there's never been I in his team. He's always been a team player, has always preached that he is no better than his surroundings, and he has meant it. So Garry, being the team player that he is, he did what he did. He stepped it up. And I'm pretty sure it was probably a thing for him in the beginning because, again, there's thousands of people out there in front of these guys, man, wanting to see them every night by this point. It's a lot of pressure. They got to deliver, and you got to be the front man of this guy. You got to be the co-front man. You have to be the perfect complement to George Clinton on this stage now. And not only that, because George was doing a lot. So George had to take his breaks, man. George couldn't exude all his energy on the stage anymore because he had to do all the other business at this point. So it's around this point, 77, going into 78, the Flashlight tour and everything, where Garry has to step up and now be the co-pilot of the mothership. So these are about the 78 years, and you're talking about the Funkadelic tour. And don't forget, this band, they don't just spend their time just doing shows. When they're not on tour doing shows, they're in the studio recording records. So while this Flashlight tour is going on, and Garry's learning his getting his frontman chops wet now, and carrying the mothership, as you see, I'm pointing the wrong way. Carrying the mothership, as you see, carrying the bop gun now, as you see, being the Starchild, they still also have to record albums. These albums have to be recorded because they're on major labels now. And somewhere between 75 and 76, the Funkadelic band left the indie label Westbound that they were originally recording on, and they were in the flux and in the midst of transitioning from Westbound Records to Warner Brother Records, another major label. So of course, when that happens, we just been through that one. When you get to the major labels, you got major pressure to score hits. So now Funkadelic, who has been cool just putting out good albums, now they have to put out some great albums, and they have to score some hits now. So what does that mean? That means that the whole thing has to step up. But in the midst of all of this, that also means Garry has to step up his writing game too, and it steps up from writing to production now. Because now you got him doing a lot more producing. You got him now stepping up and starting to feel his frontman chops, and he's starting to really get good at it now. And there you see him standing in front of that skull. And I know y'all seen the show with the skull smoking the joint, talking about fired up. Yeah, that's him, man. Just come out the skull, man, getting ready to sing Cosmic Slop. So now we're talking about 78 into 1979. And what's going on in the midst of all of this? You have now transitioning from the Funkadelic tour, because Parliament in 77 had put out Funkadelic versus Placebo, and they had Flashlight, which was a hit. featuring, but Glenn Goins was still on that record, don't forget. Now, also in the midst of this, we had the untimely death of Glenn Goins sometime in 1978. Um, in the midst of all of this transition, Parliament, the Parliament album that came out the next year in 1978, now, which goes from outer space to underwater to Atlantis, you have another hit. You have Aqua Boogie. So when you got a hit album and a hit record, you have to go on tour. So now we talking about 78, 79, the Parliament-Funkadelic franchise. They're putting out records, having to put out hit records. They have all these entities within the band that have major deals as well that they have to put out music for. And they also have to put a major tour together. You know what I'm saying? So this is the time where Dad really has to start to step his game up from a writing perspective, from a production perspective, and from a performance perspective. Um, so in the midst of all of that, what you end up getting is, uh, besides this super front man right here, because that's what ended up developing by 79. From 77 to 79, I saw my dad transition from trying to figure his way between that front man thing to becoming all of a sudden like this superstar before our eyes. Um, Pretty much becoming not the co-front man anymore, pretty much becoming the front man and taking this band over. Uh, so now, this is the Orange Suit days. I know some of y'all remember the Orange Suit days. Um, and so now what you have here is in the middle of the Orange Suit days and this super front man who's now stepped up his producing and stepped up his writing. Not to mention the band has now just also added Walter Jr. Junie Morrison to the band from the Ohio Players, Funky Worm, Susie Thunder Tussie, and all of that. Y'all know that. Y'all know Junie Morrison. So at this point, you have two major deals with Funkadelic and Parliament, and the need to produce hits. Garry becomes a major part of the writing and production team at this point. Him along with Junie Morrison and George and Bootsy and Bernie, and they go to work now. They've already scored 2 hits with Parliament and Flashlight and Motor Booty and Aqua Boogie. The Funkadelic songs now, the Funkadelic records that come out on Warner Brothers. The first one was Hardcore Jollies, no hits, and it was more kind of a typical Funkadelic record. But now you add Junie Morrison and Garry Shider to the production team. 78, you get probably Funkadelic's best record from a musical standpoint. You get One Nation Under a Groove, the title track co-written by Garry Shider himself. And a lot of these songs co-written and produced by Garry Shider himself. And then the follow-up to that one in 1979, you get Uncle Jam Wants You, that has Knee Deep, which becomes an ultra hit. And these are all in consecutive years. So you have 77 Parliament's Flashlight chart-topping hit. The follow-up, 78, the Motor Booty Affair album, you have Aqua Boogie, chart-topping hit. Funkadelic follows that up the same year with One Nation Under a Groove, chart-topping hit. And then this next year after that, 1979, you have Uncle Jam Wants You. Both albums prominently featuring production, writing, and vocal arranging and featured vocals from a polished veteran now, Garry Shider. Yeah, that's right. This Garry Shider. This is the polished veteran Garry Shider right here. This is the start of the polished veteran superstar frontman Garry Shider that we began to really fall in love with. That was around 1979. And in 1979, they were in the midst now of transitioning from, actually doing and then transitioning from the Aqua. As a matter of fact, I think it was all done in one tour, as a matter of fact, in one show at this point. And this is what happens when you taking two bands in one and putting them on two labels and making hits on both bands. You end up so that 79 they put together what ended up being probably the most elaborate stage tour that they would ever do. And you have what ended up being I don't know, I know you had the Motor Booty tour, and I think it either followed the Uncle Jam Wants You tour, or they either coincided together, and you just had this huge production. And then you add Felipe Wynn to the mix, which y'all heard Dennis and his many stories about Felipe Wynn. You add that to the mix, and then you have just this big Parliament-Funkadelic thing with the brides and Felipe Wynn and all these people, man, in 1979, and all this huge elaborate stage set and costumes and everything. And these guys just became the kings of the world. And the front man of most of it was Garry Shider, man, at his vocal best, at his production's best, if that's a word, and at his writing best. That's what it is. Garry Shider. So by 79, you have Garry Shider is on top of the world and he's doing his thing. Unfortunately, what would happen after this big elaborate tour, all of a sudden you start having a little trouble with the labels, and before you know it, they pulled the plug on everything. And by 1980, even though the band was still touring and still putting out records, they were not able to muster they weren't able to muster the same kind of momentum again for a little while. And what ended up happening from there, just as Garrett is starting to come into his frontman own, the band hits hard times and everything kind of falls apart, man. And then begins the tough years for P-Funk, which I guess I will make that my part 3 of the Garry Shider series, because I see I'm coming up on my time. I hope y'all enjoyed this here, man. If y'all do enjoy the Garry Shider series, I know I get a little rambly with it, but I'm kind of coming off the top of the head and just kind of talking about it and giving y'all what I know. But it is what I got. I hope y'all enjoy it. I will do a part 3 and we'll pick up from there, and I'll talk about the 80s and Atomic Dog and some of the George Clinton stuff and what that was like, because that's some of the stuff that I actually can really recall living right there. So that should be fun. If you enjoy my podcast, y'all make sure you subscribe if you haven't already on YouTube, or on thefunkstar.com. If you're watching it there, then switch over and go subscribe to the other one. But make sure at some point y'all go visit thefunkstar.com. If y'all enjoy these podcasts, please feel free to donate. Help me keep them going. Check out the merch at thefunkstar.com. Go subscribe so that you don't miss out on any updates. Again, make sure that y'all tune in next week, because next week I am going to have Flea on here with me on the Starchildjr Stuffs and Things podcast. And we're going to kick it about a few things, man. We're going to kick it about my time recording with the Chili Peppers, and I'm pretty sure he's going to tell some stories about Dad that you guys will probably like. And we'll see if we can get him to talk about his book a little bit, Acid for the Children. Y'all go check out Flea's book, Acid for the Children, and y'all ask him some questions in the chat when I get him on here. Hey, go do your research, man. Other than that, I want y'all to have a great weekend. And again, wear your masks. Don't argue. Don't debate it. Put your mask on. Hand sanitizer. Wash your hands. Keep safe out there, y'all. I will see you all next week on the Starchildjr Stuffs and Things podcast with Flea. All right, chill, y'all.